This is Blue Nile oregano. Evaluation of internal control systems and communication of deficiencies. 1. Evaluation of internal control systems. Internal controls are assessed to ensure the organization operates efficiently, complies with regulations, and prevents material misstatements. Key steps include understanding the system, document processes using flowcharts or narratives, identify key controls over financial reporting, asset protection and compliance, risk assessment, highlight areas prone to error or fraud, for example, cash handling, revenue recognition, or inventory management, testing controls, perform walkthroughs to verify control implementation, test control effectiveness by examining samples of transactions for proper authorization, documentation, and segregation of duties. 2. Communication of internal control deficiencies. Funds should be communicated clearly and promptly to management and those charged with governance. Categories of deficiencies. Control deficiency. A minor weakness that doesn't lead to material misstatement. Significant deficiency. A deficiency that could impact financial reporting but is not critical. Material weakness. A serious issue that creates a reasonable possibility of material misstatement. Reporting process. Immediate communication. Significant deficiencies and material weaknesses should be communicated in writing as soon as identified. Management letter. Highlight deficiencies, their implications, and recommend improvements. Tips for exam answers. Link internal controls to financial statement assertions, for example, completeness, accuracy. Use specific examples of control deficiencies and how they might lead to errors. Explain why communication of deficiencies is vital for governance and risk management. By addressing evaluation and communication comprehensively, this approach meets exam requirements effectively. We are going to look at a question from the December 2013 exam called Oregano. This is question 3 in the exam and covers the following syllabus areas: evaluation of internal control systems and communication of internal control deficiencies. This is a 20-mark question. Please remember you have 1.8 minutes for every mark, and so no more than 36 minutes should be spent answering this. To successfully complete this question, you will need to plan your answer, taking care with the time allocated to each part of the question, use the scenario, and have clear and efficient communication. It may be worth pausing the video at this point and printing off the exam question. That way you can follow the scenario as we talk through it. This question has a scenario explaining the sales and dispatch system of oregano. The requirements beneath it all relate to internal controls in some shape or form. Unlike many internal control questions, the scenario is based on the internal audit department reviewing the system for deficiencies instead of the external auditors. This, however, has no impact on the way you answer this type of question, as the type of work is completed in the same way by both types of auditor. Before looking at the scenario, it is always worth reviewing the requirements to establish what we need to look for. It helps to know what we're looking for when reading, especially given the time you have in exam conditions. Let's start breaking down the requirements. Part A asks us to describe 2 methods for documenting the sales and dispatch system, and for each, explain an advantage and a disadvantage of using this method. This requirement is for 6 marks and should therefore take no more than 11 minutes. The marking allocation would be to allocate 1 mark for each explained method to document the system, then a further 1 mark for each advantage and disadvantage. You will only get marks for answering 2 methods with an advantage and disadvantage, so there is no need to write down everything you know. This also does not require any application to the scenario question, and therefore knowledge from your studies only will help you with this answer. Part B and C require the scenario for a successful answer. Part B asks us to list 2 control objectives of oregano's sales and dispatch system. This is a 2-mark question, taking around 3 minutes to complete. This is a straightforward 2 marks if you have revised control objectives and can relate this knowledge to the scenario given. Part C finally leans heavily on the scenario. It asks us to identify and explain 6 deficiencies in oregano's sales and dispatch system, and provide a recommendation to address each of these deficiencies. This is a 12-mark question, and therefore no more than 22 minutes should be spent on this. We can see this requirement is asking for 2 things: the deficiency in controls mentioned in the scenario, and the recommendation to improve the control. Half a mark is allocated for identifying the deficiency in the question, and then a further half a mark is allocated for explaining why it is a deficiency. This can be explaining what impact it could have on the company if it is not improved. A further 1 mark will be awarded for a sensible recommendation to improve that area of the control system. Therefore, up to 2 marks will be awarded for each deficiency found. Now we have outlined the structure of the question, let's look at the first requirement. Part A. We need to describe 2 methods of documenting the sales and dispatch system, and for each explain an advantage and a disadvantage of using this method. Documenting the sales system is an important aspect of understanding and analyzing the control system. There are several methods that can be used to do this. The aim is to ensure the system is understood and to assess for potential deficiencies. Internal and external auditors would communicate any issues found to management once systems have been reviewed. It is one of the important roles of an internal auditor to report to management and implement any changes needed. External auditors report any deficiencies found during their audit work and recommend changes at the end of the audit once all of the work is complete in the form of a management letter or report to management. Methods available to document the system are as follows: narrative notes, flowcharts, and questionnaires. We need to select 2 methods, explain for 1 mark each, and then explain 1 advantage and 1 disadvantage for each. I have selected narrative notes and flowcharts for our answer. To structure my answer, I would head up each method with a title. I would then for 1 short paragraph explain what the method is, then have 2 further paragraphs, one for the advantage and the other for the disadvantage. This is an organized approach to your answer that will help ensure you stick to the requirements. It also makes it much easier for the marker to allocate marks to you, as long as what you've answered makes sense. Narrative notes. The process of creating narrative notes is quite straightforward. They should be step-by-step explanations of how the system works from start to finish. They are usually quite detailed and outline the controls that are present at each stage of the system. An advantage to this would be that they are reasonably easy to understand once completed. Internal audit team members at all levels should be able to follow and understand the system with this method. A disadvantage would be that, while they detail the system as a whole, it is not easy to identify from these detailed notes where the control deficiencies are. Flowcharts. A flowchart is a more visual tool to outline the sales and dispatch system. They would use lines to connect one stage of the system to the next and include symbols to highlight controls and documents. An advantage is, as this is much more visual with standard symbols, it is easy to identify where the control deficiencies are. A disadvantage is that as this is an overview of the system, detailed notes are often still needed, and so this can be a time-consuming operation to complete. And so to summarize the points and the marking allocation, narrative notes are detailed step-by-step notes of the system. An advantage is they are easy to understand, but not easy to identify control deficiencies from, and 3 marks allocated here. Flowcharts are visual tools to show the system linked with symbols for controls and documents. An advantage is they are easy to identify missing controls, but not a fast process to create them. A further 3 marks allocated here to total 6 marks. Now on to parts B and C and the review of the scenario. Once the requirements have been reviewed, we can then read through the detail in the scenario. As you read, make notes in the margins, underline areas of the text or highlight to help plan the outline of your answers. This is particularly important for Part C, where we need to find deficiencies in controls mentioned in the scenario and then recommend changes. This will all help speed up the process of putting pen to paper. Part B requires us to list 2 control objectives of the sales and dispatch system. Examples of control objectives in a sales system can be remembered from your studies. However, you can lean on the scenario to help you think of control objectives by looking at the controls that are in place in oregano. If you identify a control in the sales and dispatch system, you can then think about why that procedure has been included in the system. It is the reason why we have the control that the question is looking for. There are only 2 needed, and there are plenty within the system to choose from. Stick to the requirements and only mention 2. It also states to list, so no great detail is needed. Just a sentence on each will do. As you read through the scenario, we come across our first control in the second sentence under the heading of Sales and Dispatch System. It tells us that online orders are automatically checked against inventory records for availability. This is a great control. The reason for this is it will ensure that orders cannot be accepted where goods are not available. This is effectively our control objective and gives you 1 mark. Another control further along in the paragraph is that the clerk records details on an order form and copies are forwarded to the dispatch and accounts department. This control of communicating the order detail ensures the order is recorded accurately within the system. As you run through the system, you can note many other controls, and then the idea is to write why that control would be in place. For example, in the next paragraph, it mentions credit limits for customers. Why would they set credit limits? The objective would be to ensure customers are able to pay for goods supplied on credit. As mentioned before, this is a 2-mark question. The best approach would be to highlight 2 controls of the sales and dispatch system as quickly as possible and write down the objective. Then it's time to move on to the more detailed Part C. Part C is to identify and explain 6 deficiencies in oregano's sales and dispatch system and provide a recommendation. There are 2 parts to this requirement: the deficiency and the recommendation. We can structure our answer by setting up columns with underlined headings. As you should have underlined some control deficiencies already on the face of the question, the next job is to put these down on paper, explaining why they are a deficiency on one side of the answer, then recommend how to improve the control on the other side. This is an efficient way of answering the question and once again makes it easier for the marker to follow your answer and allocate the marks. The 6 deficiencies I have identified from my answer are as follows. For telephone orders, inventory is checked manually after the call is ended. The clerk notes the order on plain paper and then records onto the 3-part order form. The order forms are not sequentially numbered. Customers are allowed to exceed their credit limit by 10%. There is no evidence that the dispatch notes are checked by the warehouse staff. And discounts given are manually entered by the sales clerk on the invoice. The telephone orders do not have inventory checked until after the call has been made. This is done manually, unlike the online orders where inventory is automatically checked for availability before the order is completed. If inventory is not checked, it may not be available. Order clerks may forget to call back to let the customer know, or may delay in doing so. This could affect customer morale and they may go elsewhere in future. Here you can see we have literally copied the deficiency from the scenario for half a mark. I have then explained practically why it would be a deficiency for oregano for a further half a mark. For the recommendation, we could simply say that oregano should have updated inventory records available and they should be reviewed for availability while on the phone. This would give us a final hallmark. The same approach can be applied to the remainder of the deficiencies. The scenario tells us that the order clerk would note down the details from the phone call on a piece of paper and then fill in the 3-part order form after the call. This increases the risk of human error. The order clerk may forget to fill in the order form, lose the details on the piece of paper, or even transfer the product details and quantity incorrectly, causing goods dispatched to be incorrect or missing. This would affect customer goodwill. A recommendation would be to use the order forms to complete the order whilst on the phone. They should also repeat back the order to the customer while on the phone to ensure they have recorded the details correctly. Another deficiency is that the order forms are not sequentially numbered. If order forms go missing, there is no system in place to be able to identify this. Goods may therefore not arrive with the customer, and this could lead to customer complaints and delays in resolving customer issues. A recommendation is to ensure the 3-part order form is sequentially numbered. As copies are sent to the dispatch department to prepare the goods, the dispatch department should regularly run a sequence check on the order forms received and fulfilled and ensure none are missing. Customers are allowed to exceed their credit limits by 10% as the company is expanding. By giving customers more credit, it may increase the risk of bad debts. More credit may be given to those already struggling to pay. The system should then be amended to ensure credit limits are not exceeded. If an order takes them over their credit limit, this should then be reviewed by a responsible official, who can then approve any increases in credit. During the dispatch process, a dispatch note is produced, which is signed by the customer and then filed by the dispatch staff. There is no evidence in the scenario that this paperwork is checked against the dispatched goods or the original order form. Dispatch note details may not agree with the goods sent out or the order form, which could mean incorrect goods and quantities, and an increase in sales returns and credit notes. The dispatch note details such as quantities and product type should be checked against the original order and the goods leaving. There should be evidence of checking this, such as a staff signature or stamp. Discounts given to customers are entered manually by the sales clerk on the invoice. This once again increases the risk of human error, with mistakes being made on the invoice, and also lead to unauthorized discounts being issued to customers, as there is no evidence these discounts are approved. The customer master file or account details should be updated with any approved discounts. This would then mean they are automatically going to appear on the invoice with no reason for any manual amendment. In summary, here are our 6 deficiencies. No inventory checked on telephone orders. Not using the order form to record orders on the telephone. Order forms not sequentially numbered. Customers being allowed to exceed their credit limits. Dispatch departments not matching dispatch note or order to actual goods. And discounts being entered manually by the sales clerk. Please remember, to be successful in this type of question, we need to plan the approach and ensure we have identified how long is needed for each part of the question. Use headings to introduce your answers, and space out your points so it's clear for the marker where the marks can be allocated. Finally, if there is a scenario, use it. This information was given to you for a reason, and it's a fate. They are trying to see if you can apply your knowledge to a given scenario, and not just be able to remember the facts. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and good luck.